Okay, so that was the perfect information version of the model. Now we're going to solve the same model under imperfect information. So just to make our lives easier and to make notation easier, we're going to define something called the relative price. So, that's basically this object in levels. The price of firm I, or household I, divided by the average price in the economy. In logs, it looks like this. Okay, and firms are going to know what their little pi is. They go to the farmer's market, they see what the price of their pumpkins is, but they don't know what the average price level in the whole economy is. Okay, so you recall that optimal production looks like this. So that says that the amount that firms produce is, this is now in levels, is just this object. So the way this works is if my price is high, that's when I want to supply more labor. It's more worthwhile for me to supply labor. But if I really hate working more, that's if gamma is very, very high, so that my labor in my utility function is subtracted with this very concave function, so that if I work a little bit more, it's really hurting me, then I'm not going to react much to changes in prices. But on the other hand, if gamma is low, then I will. Okay, so that's where this comes from, to remind you. So you can see that this basically depends upon this Ri we've defined. It depends on, so it's going to be 1 divided by gamma minus 1 times this new thing we have called little Ri. Okay, so under perfect information, firms are going to supply exactly 1 divided by gamma minus 1 times little Ri because they observe little Ri. But now, under imperfect information, they only are going to observe Pi, their own price. They don't observe P. Okay, so what are they going to do? They're going to produce what the sort of expected version of this optimal supply equation. So it's going to be 1 divided by gamma minus 1 times the expectation of the relative price conditional on observed own price. They don't observe the average price level. Okay, so what do they have to do? They're going to have to estimate, right? So we're going to assume that these firms are rational and that they're going to do the best they can to estimate the relative price conditional on only observing their own price. So the rest of this set of slides is all just about how they're going to do that. What's the quote, rational best they can do, closest to the truth expectation that they can do to solve this problem of estimating relative price. Okay, so how are we going to do it? Well, let's assume that the firms know something. The general problem would be very difficult to solve. We're going to sort of make our lives easier by assuming that firms know something about the distribution of these various variables. Okay. So the beliefs that they're going to have are that the price level is going to be normally distributed, the average price level, and it's going to have an expectation, which they'll know, and then a variance. Over here, I think actually, there's different ways of writing a normal distribution. I actually think that if this were variance, we'd want to have a 1/2 here. But because usually, I guess, do you put the standard deviation here or the variance? I don't know. This is the variance. That's the important part. Okay, so the average price level, the firms are going to assume that it's distributed normally. The relative price level, the firms are going to assume that it's distributed normally. Remember, this is in logs. So on average, they're going to expect that Pi divided by P is equal to 1, okay, on average, which makes sense since on average Pi is equal to P. So equals 1 on average. So when we take a log, then the log of 1 is 0. You notice I'm being slightly coy here. There's a bit of hand waving going on, but it's a relatively minor issue. And then we're going to assume the variance of this object here is equal to VR. And then finally, we're going to assume that the covariance between Ri and P is equal to 0. which is just saying that as the price level grows, the way that the relative prices vary around that price level doesn't depend on the actual price level. So, these shocks are sort of independent of the price level. Ultimately, these, they could be caused by these demand shocks, right? So anyway, that's it. We're going to make these assumptions about the distributions, and then we can actually go and figure out how the firm is going to guess the relative price level conditional on only observing its own price.